Natural disasters and the way in which a government responds to them can affect the relationship between government and the people for years, as I think we've seen here in the U.S. after Hurricane Katrina. When I asked another senior Japanese official, what's the biggest headache you face in disaster relief? He rolled his eyes and he said, how to deal with all the international offers of assistance. As of this week, the Japanese government reported receiving offers of assistance from 159 countries, 43 international organizations. Like the U.S. and Hurricane Katrina, the issue of dealing with these spontaneous, generous offers of assistance is a big headache. In the absence of systems to vet, to know which organizations to allow in, which kind of response is needed, it's very difficult for governments and for NGOs to figure out. Here I refer often to Ann Richards' little study on role reversal that looked at the international offers of assistance that came in after Hurricane Katrina, which shows some of the difficulties in how the U.S. government could respond to offers of plane loads of medical supplies coming in, or food or technical expertise. But there are other issues as well. Japan, like the U.S., sees itself as a donor. It is a large, major humanitarian and development donor. How do you respond when those you are assisting are offering you aid? This week, the Kenyan government announced a $1 million contribution for Japanese earthquake relief. Kenya is the largest recipient of Japanese overseas development assistance. In Samoa and Antigua and Uganda, people are organizing collections to help the victims of the Japanese earthquake. And maybe just to give a very personal story, about 10 or 12 years ago, our house burned down. We lost everything, but nobody was hurt, and it was fine. But we didn't know how to deal with offers of assistance. We were a middle-class family. My husband and I had good jobs. We had good house insurance. And people began taking up collections to help us. And we were grateful for the money because there are some things insurance doesn't cover. But there was something kind of uneasy. It was like, we can take care of our family. Do you think we can't? Is that why you're giving me a check for $25? I mean, there's something about that slight embarrassment at being on the receiving end of assistance after a natural disaster that I think characterized both the U.S. response after Katrina and the Japanese response now. And finally, just to point out that for developed countries, as for developing countries, it works much better if systems are in place. After Hurricane Katrina, for example, it was military cooperation between military forces, say, in Canada or Mexico and other places that seemed to work the most smoothly because the relationships had been built before. People knew what to expect. There were standard ways of operating that seemed to function much more smoothly than the attention given to these many, many offers of assistance. The need to think about international disaster response law, of putting into place legal frameworks that can function automatically when a disaster occurs. And in fact, no government in the world has gotten it completely right. Norway is the first and I believe the only country in the world, for example, to have in place a humanitarian worker visa program. If a disaster happens in Norway and medical personnel are needed, for example, it's clear under what category they will come in. Laws or policies about what kind of goods to accept and when customs procedures should be circumvented or expedited. These are things that are much easier to work out in the calm before the storm than after a disaster.